I am Mary, 30 years old, and for most of my life, I lived under my mother's shadow, doing everything in my power to earn a smile that never came. I bought her gifts, I cooked her meals, I drove her to every appointment, and yet nothing was enough. On the night of her 60th birthday, in a room filled with friends, neighbors, and my perfect sister Angela, she gave me a gift that burned itself into my bones. The restaurant was glittering with light crystal glasses, catching the glow of chandeliers, bouquets of lilies and hydrangeas decorating the table I had paid for with months of savings. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted her to finally see me, to see the daughter who had sacrificed her own life just to remain by her side. As the cake was placed before her and the candles flickered, she stood with her glass of wine raised high. I thought she would thank me, maybe mention me kindly for once, maybe call me a good daughter. Instead, she looked directly at me, her voice calm, her eyes cold, and said, "The best gift would be if you left my life. You are nothing but a leech." The room froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. A hush spread over the table, broken only by a few nervous laughs that quickly died. I felt as if my chest had been split open. My face burned. My hands shook around the little box in my lap that held the sapphire brooch I had bought her, the most expensive thing I had ever owned. My sister's eyes darted away. My mother took a sip of wine, satisfied with the silence, satisfied with my humiliation. I forced a smile that felt like glass cutting through my lips and lifted my own glass, determined not to give her the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. That was when I saw her hand move across the table. It was swift, practiced, like she had done this before. She leaned close, pretending to fix her napkin, and dropped something into my drink. It dissolved instantly. No one else noticed, but I did. The liquid swirled differently, a faint bitterness rising to the surface. My mother leaned back in her chair, her eyes locking with mine, daring me. "Drink it. Be useful at least once tonight." The words were whispered just for me, carried across the table in a voice sharp enough to slice. My pulse thundered. For a moment, I thought about setting the glass down, about calling her bluff. But then I remembered every year of her contempt, every cruel word, every time I had hoped she would love me, and she chose instead to break me. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I would play it better. I lifted the glass. The wine was sharp, metallic wrong. Heat crawled down my throat, my stomach twisting in an instant. My vision blurred. My head began to pound the chandelier above me, spinning like a cruel carousel. Around me, the guests continued to talk, to laugh, to toast. No one saw. No one ever saw. I let my body sway, let my eyelids flutter, and when the dizziness crested into a wave, I surrendered and let myself fall. A cry went up. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. My mother's voice rose above the panic. "Oh, she is always dramatic. She will be fine." But in that moment, as I lay on the floor, my pulse fading into a rhythm of steel, I knew the truth. She had tried to kill me in front of everyone, and I also knew something else. If she wanted me gone so badly, I would grant her wish, but not in the way she imagined. What came next would not be my disappearance. It would be her destruction. I grew up in a small Pennsylvania town where the streets were lined with maple trees that turned golden in the fall, and neighbors waved at each other from their porches. To the outside world, our family looked perfect. My mother, Catherine, was the kind of woman people admired. She dressed in pressed blouses, pearls at her neck, her hair always styled into soft curls. She was president of the garden club. She organized bake sales at the church. She sent holiday cards with handwritten notes. People praised her as elegant, refined, respectable. They did not know that behind the closed doors of our white Victorian house, she ruled with a sharp tongue and a colder heart. From the time I was small, she demanded perfection from me. "Sit up straight, Mary, a lady does not slouch. Do not eat that second cookie, Mary, you will get fat and no man will ever want you. Why can you not be more like Angela?" Angela was my older sister by 5 years, and she was everything my mother wanted. Blonde, graceful, brilliant in school, a girl who collected awards like other kids collected seashells. She escaped to New York for college and never really came back except for holidays. When she arrived, our mother transformed into warmth and laughter. bragging about Angela's promotions in finance, her handsome husband, her perfect children. When Angela left, the house turned cold again and all the criticism fell on me. My father, Robert, was my only refuge. He was a kind man with tired eyes, a mechanical engineer who worked long hours but still found time to sit with me at the kitchen table and help me with math homework. He kept my artwork pinned on the walls of his garage, even when my mother called them childish scribbles. He slipped candy into my pockets when she scolded me about calories. Sometimes he would whisper, "Do not listen too much to her, Mary. You are enough." But when I was 16, he died suddenly of a heart attack. I remember the day of the funeral, the cold rain, the umbrella collapsing in the wind, and my mother's face twisted not with grief but with fury. She cried only once, a single controlled sob at the graveside, and then it was as if she had locked her heart away forever. With my father gone, there was no buffer between us. The criticism that he had shielded me from now came unfiltered, sharp as broken glass. "You are getting pudgy, Mary," she would say, while I weighed barely 120 pounds at 5'6". "You will never hold a man's interest if you cannot control yourself." When I tried to sing in the school choir, she told me my voice sounded like a crow. When I wore the wrong dress to a dance, she hissed that I looked cheap. Every attempt I made to please her was dismissed. The harder I tried, the more she cut me down. After high school, I earned a scholarship to a university in California for graphic design. For the first time in my life, I felt a spark of freedom, a glimpse of the world outside our small town. But just as I was about to accept, my mother began complaining of dizzy spells. Doctors found nothing wrong. Yet she clutched the arms of chairs, dramatically sighing about weakness. She said she could not manage the house alone. She looked at me with that tight smile and said, "If you leave, you might as well bury me too." So I stayed. I gave up California, gave up the dream of working for a big design firm, and enrolled at the local state university just 30 minutes from home. I told myself it was temporary, that once she felt stronger I could still go, but deep down I knew she would never release me. After college, I found work at a small marketing agency in town. The pay was enough, the commute short, and it meant I could check on her during lunch breaks. I saved enough to buy a little bungalow 3 blocks away, hoping the distance would give me some independence, but close enough that I could still come whenever she called. And she always called. "Mary, the gutters are clogged, and you know I cannot afford a handyman. Mary, I need my prescriptions today. Mary, the groceries are too heavy." She never mentioned the investment portfolio my father had left. Her never admitted she had plenty of money tucked away. I was her unpaid maid, her chauffeur, her scapegoat. Meanwhile, Angela soared through life in New York. Each holiday, she swept into town with designer bags and stories of vacations in Europe. Our mother beamed as Angela described closing million-dollar deals, then turned to me with disdain when I tried to share my own accomplishments. When I was promoted to creative director at the agency, a role I had fought hard for, she sniffed. Creative director at a small-town agency is hardly a real executive position. Angela would never waste her talents here. My relationships never lasted either. Any man I dated was dissected and mocked. He does not make enough money. His car is shabby. His laugh is annoying. Even when a boyfriend proposed to move in together, my mother told me bluntly, "He will leave you the second he realizes you are not as pretty as your sister." The boyfriend did not leave for that reason, but he did leave tired of me dropping everything to run back to my mother. By the time I turned 30, I was alone, tethered to a woman who seemed to take pleasure in keeping me small. And yet, despite everything, I still longed for her approval. Every Mother's Day, every birthday, every Christmas, I searched for the perfect gift, the gesture that might finally earn a real smile. Once, I bought her a cashmere sweater in a color I thought would complement her eyes. She returned it, saying it washed her out. Once I surprised her with concert tickets to her favorite pianist. She never went, claiming she had no time. Another year I paid for a spa weekend, but she declined because she would rather Angela visit. Each rejection cut deeper, yet I kept trying. I told myself that if I worked harder, if I sacrificed more, she might soften. But Catherine Wilson never softened. She was stone-polished and cold-admired by everyone else and impossible to please at home. By the time her 60th birthday approached, I knew deep inside that no gift would ever be enough, but I still planned the celebration. I still hoped. Hope was the chain that bound me tighter than any lock. As I grew older, the years blended into one long stretch of sacrifice and quiet resentment. My days followed a predictable rhythm. I woke early, drove to the marketing agency, spent hours designing campaigns for local businesses, then rushed back to handle my mother's endless needs. At first, I thought I could balance both worlds, but slowly my own life shrank until it existed only in the spaces she allowed. She called me at work to berate me for forgetting to water her plants. She summoned me on weekends to clean her gutters. If I tried to refuse, she grew dramatic, claiming she was in pain or dizzy. When I offered to hire professional help, she snapped that I was selfish and wasting money. It was easier to give in than to fight. My small bungalow 3 blocks away became an extension of her house. She visited unannounced, often criticizing the furniture I had chosen, the food in my refrigerator, the state of my lawn. Nothing escaped her judgment. One afternoon, she stood in my kitchen staring at a bouquet of sunflowers a friend had given me and said flatly, "Sunflowers are tacky." Angela would never let something so garish into her home. It was always Angela, the golden child, the example I could never live up to. Every phone call with my mother eventually circled back to Angela's accomplishments. Angela just closed $1 million deal. Angela is taking the family to Paris this summer. Angela's children are at the top of their class. The comparisons were endless and merciless. Even when Angela barely visited, staying in hotels instead of with us, she remained the idol. I was the shadow, the disappointment who had never left. The years of criticism wore me down like waves grinding stone. I began to believe her words, to see myself through her contemptuous eyes. At work, I achieved steady success, climbing to a leadership position in creative design, but every time I tried to celebrate, she undercut me. "Creative director is nothing in this town," she sneered. "You will never measure up to your sister." The more I heard it, the smaller I felt. My confidence eroded. I stopped bringing boyfriends home because I knew she would find flaws. When I once introduced a kind man named David who worked as a teacher, she pulled me aside afterward and whispered, "His shoes are cheap. You cannot be serious about him." Within months, the relationship ended. The pattern repeated itself until I began to think I was unlovable. Meanwhile, her dependence grew. Real health issues began to appear, arthritis in her hips, making stairs difficult. The doctor advised her to consider a single-level home, but she refused to leave the Victorian she had shared with my father. She leaned on me instead. I bought her groceries, drove her to appointments, cleaned her house. Once during a flare-up, she stayed in my bungalow for 3 weeks. I worked from the kitchen table, headphones in, trying to focus while she called for me from the next room every hour. "Mary, the tea is too weak." "Mary, the blanket is itchy." "Mary, close the window." I barely slept. My nerves stretched thin, yet when Angela visited briefly, she found our mother cheerful, polite, transformed. All the complaints vanished, replaced by smiles and endless questions about Angela's career. I stood invisible in the corner, pouring coffee, while they reminisced about family trips I was too young to remember. Despite everything, I still sought approval. I still chased the fantasy that one day she would look at me with pride. The harder she pushed me away, the harder I tried. I bought her gifts I could not afford. I planned outings she refused to attend. I ignored the loneliness that hollowed my nights. My friends drifted away, tired of my constant excuses. Boyfriends left. My coworkers saw only the professional mask I wore at the agency. Inside, I was exhausted, brittle, desperate. By the time her 60th birthday approached, I was both determined and terrified. Determined to finally create a celebration so perfect she could not dismiss it, terrified that she would find a way to wound me again. I spent weeks planning, reserving the best restaurant in town, arranging flowers in her favorite colors, ordering a cake flavored with lemon and buttercream. I chose a sapphire brooch from an antique shop, spending money I had set aside for a design course in New York. I thought perhaps if I gave her something she had once admired, she might see my effort. I even begged Angela to come, hoping her presence might soften our mother's mood. Angela agreed reluctantly, promising to drive with her husband. I held on to hope as if it were a lifeline, though part of me knew the truth. Experience had taught me that every celebration ended with me humiliated, every effort dismissed. But still, I prayed this time would be different. Hope is stubborn. It clings even when reason tells you to let go. I practiced my smile in the mirror, chose a navy dress conservative enough for her taste, styled my hair the way she preferred. I wanted to step into that restaurant as the daughter she could finally claim with pride. But beneath the surface of my preparations ran a river of dread. I could not admit it out loud, but in my gut I sensed what was coming. I sensed that this birthday would not be the beginning of acceptance, but the breaking point. I was right. The night of my mother's 60th birthday arrived heavy with anticipation. I spent the morning at the salon, trimming my hair, smoothing it into the style she always approved of minimal makeup, so she could not complain that I looked cheap, and the navy dress pressed and ready. I drove to her house early gift box tucked carefully in my purse, my heart pounding with the hope that maybe, just maybe, this night would be different. She opened the door in her robe, unhurried as always, and criticized me for rushing her. I reminded her of the reservation, but she waved a hand and told me that Angela had called and said they would be late. I doubted it, but held my tongue, steaming her navy dress at her command, biting back the thought that we would arrive matching. By the time she was ready, it was already past 6:30. My palms sweated as I called the restaurant to delay our table yet again. When we finally arrived, most of the guests were waiting, some already restless. Angela and her husband were among them, sipping drinks, smiling politely. My mother glided inside as if she were the star of the evening, which of course she was. She laughed, blaming me for our tardiness, and the guests nodded sympathetically. I swallowed the lump in my throat. The private dining room sparkled with crystal glasses, white lilies, and blue hydrangeas. I had chosen every detail with care, but she wrinkled her nose and muttered that lilies were too strong for dining. A few friends defended me, saying the flowers were perfect, but the sting was already there. Dinner began, conversations flowing easily among the others. Angela told stories of her business trips to London, her children's private school, her glamorous life. My mother beamed with pride, laughing warmly, touching Angela's hand. I tried to join with a story about a campaign our agency had won, but my mother cut me off, demanding I fetch more water. The dismissal was sharp final. I shrank back into silence. The main course passed with me serving more than speaking, the weight of invisibility pressing on my chest. Then the cake arrived, glowing candles, a delicate lemon sponge with buttercream frosting, her favorite. The room dimmed as everyone prepared for her to make a wish. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the box that contained the sapphire brooch. I wanted to present it at just the right moment to remind her of something beautiful to make her proud. A family friend called for a speech. Catherine smiled, raising her glass. She thanked her friends, praised Angela and her family, then turned her gaze to me. Her lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "And of course, Mary," she said, "always present." A ripple of awkward laughter passed through the guests. My throat tightened. Then she continued, her voice clear and deliberate. "At this stage of life, one should remove stress and surround oneself with joy. If I could have one wish, one perfect gift, it would be this. Mary, I wish you would finally leave my life and give me peace." The words sliced the air like a knife. The room fell silent. Glasses, frozen forks, suspended. I felt 12 pairs of eyes glance toward me, then quickly look away. My sister whispered "Mother," but did nothing more. My body went cold, numb. I clutched the gift box so tightly my knuckles whitened. My mother sipped her wine with satisfaction. The humiliation was complete, orchestrated in front of her entire circle. But she was not done. As the laughter and whispers resumed, she leaned toward me, her voice low, and pushed her glass closer. "Drink up, Mary. Be useful at least once." Her hand moved swiftly, a small object dropping into my wine. I saw it dissolve, the liquid swirling unnaturally. No one else noticed, all eyes on the cake. But I knew. The bitterness of her contempt had taken physical form. My heart thundered. For a moment, I considered standing, shouting, exposing her immediately. But then something inside me shifted. A lifetime of silent suffering condensed into a single sharp resolve. If she wanted me gone, I would give her what she asked for, but on my terms. I lifted the glass, her gaze locked with mine. The wine tasted metallic, wrong. Heat surged through my body, my head spinning. I let the dizziness wash over me. I let my knees buckle. Gasps erupted as I collapsed to the floor. Guests scrambled chairs, scraping voices rising in panic. A doctor rushed forward, examining me, calling for help. My mother's voice rang out above the chaos. "She is always dramatic. She will be fine." Her attempt to dismiss it only deepened the shock in the room. Someone called an ambulance. I let my eyes close, body limp, the taste of poison still burning in my throat. In that moment, beneath the fear and the spinning lights, a strange calm settled over me. She had tried to end me publicly, confident no one would believe the truth. But she had underestimated me. For the first time, I was not afraid of her. I was planning. The humiliation she thought would break me would become the stage for her downfall. This was no longer about seeking her love. This was about survival, justice, and freedom. The hospital lights were blinding when I woke, the steady beep of monitors in my ears and the faint chemical smell of antiseptic filling my lungs. A nurse leaned over me with gentle eyes, asking how I felt, offering water. My throat was raw, my body weak, but my mind was clear. The poison had not killed me, though it could have if I had swallowed more. The doctor later told me I was lucky that someone must have called the ambulance quickly. I thought of my mother's dismissive voice, her claim that I was only dramatic, and I knew it had not been her. She had hoped the poison would finish the job before anyone noticed. My sister Angela stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. When she saw me awake, she approached, her tone clipped. "Mary, what happened?" I studied her face, searching for compassion, but found only irritation and fear. She was not asking what had happened to me. She was asking what story she should tell the others. I whispered the truth that Mother had poisoned my drink. Angela froze, lips pressed tight, then shook her head quickly. "You cannot say things like that. People will think you are unstable. Our mother has a reputation. Do not destroy it." My stomach clenched, not from the poison, but from the familiar betrayal. Angela's loyalty had never been to me. She lived in the glow of our mother's approval and would not risk that for my survival. I said nothing more, conserving my energy. But inside, something hardened. I realized that for the first time in my life, I did not care about protecting my mother's image. I cared about exposing it. Over the next few days, I recovered physically, but my mind was aflame with plans. If I told the truth openly without proof, people would dismiss me as dramatic, exactly as my mother had painted me for years. I needed evidence. I needed witnesses. I needed to be strategic. I returned home quietly, avoiding my mother's house, ignoring her calls. She left messages dripping with false concern, asking why I was angry, suggesting I must have fainted from stress. I did not respond. Instead, I began preparing. I visited the restaurant where the party had been held and asked the manager if their cameras recorded that night. He nodded, saying they always kept footage for 30 days. My pulse quickened as I requested a copy. A few days later, I sat in my bungalow, watching the grainy video on my laptop. The footage showed my mother leaning toward me, her hand hovering over my glass, a small movement, then liquid swirling differently. It was subtle, but undeniable. Tears burned my eyes, not from sadness, but from vindication. I finally had something concrete, but I knew it was not enough. People would claim it looked like an accident, that she had brushed the glass. I needed more. So I turned to those who had been present. I began calling guests one by one, framing my questions carefully. I asked what they remembered about that moment, how they felt when my mother dismissed my collapse. Some were evasive, others sympathetic. A few admitted they had found her reaction strange, that it seemed cruel. I recorded every call with permission, noting their unease. Piece by piece, I was building a tapestry of truth. Meanwhile, my mother continued parading herself around town as the perfect hostess, lamenting to anyone who would listen that her poor daughter was fragile and fainted from nerves. She thought she had silenced me. She did not realize I was gathering allies. My greatest test came with Angela. She visited my bungalow one evening, her perfume filling the doorway, her eyes sharp. "Mother is upset," she said. "She thinks you are spreading lies." I asked her plainly if she had seen the hand drop something into my glass. Angela faltered, then insisted she saw nothing. But her hesitation told me enough. She knew. She just refused to admit it. That night, I decided to stop waiting for her loyalty. I could not rely on Angela. I would rely on myself. Over the next weeks, I began documenting everything. I pulled out journals I had kept since my teens filled with my mother's words, her insults, her manipulations. I photographed them. I collected medical reports from the hospital. I visited a lawyer under the pretense of discussing guardianship, then shifted the conversation to attempted poisoning. The lawyer advised caution, saying it would be difficult to prove intent without stronger evidence. I left his office resolved to find exactly that. Then I remembered something my father had once told me. Your mother loves appearances more than truth. She would rather die than be exposed. Those words became my weapon. I decided the best way to counter her control was not to confront her in private, where she could twist reality, but to confront her publicly, where the facade mattered most. I began planning an event of my own. My agency was preparing its annual community gala, a fundraiser attended by many local leaders. I volunteered to coordinate, ensuring I would have access to the stage and to the guest list. Quietly, I arranged for many of the same people who had been at the birthday party to attend. I even persuaded the restaurant manager to donate catering, guaranteeing his presence. Behind the scenes, I worked with a technician friend to edit the video footage from the birthday, enhancing the clarity. The image of my mother's hand hovering over the glass became sharper, undeniable. The night of the gala arrived. I stood in the hall, nerves racing, but determination stronger. My mother arrived in pearls and silk, smiling for every camera, shaking hands with church leaders, unaware that her empire of respectability was about to collapse. As the program began, I took my place at the podium, welcoming guests, thanking donors, smiling through the applause. My voice did not tremble. When the time came for closing remarks, I cleared my throat and said I wished to share something personal, something about the reality of family behind closed doors. The room grew quiet. Faces turned toward me with polite curiosity. I spoke calmly, recounting years of criticism, of sacrifice, of being overshadowed. Then I described the birthday night, her toast, her words calling me a leech. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I paused, letting the discomfort settle. Then I said, "And then she tried to poison me." Gasps erupted, chairs shifting. My mother stiffened, her smile frozen. Before she could respond, I signaled to the technician. The screen behind me lit up with the video. The footage played, showing her hand dropping something into my glass, the liquid swirling, then me collapsing. The room went silent except for the sound of her voice captured faintly on the audio, dismissing me as dramatic. The effect was seismic. Whispers turned into stares, guests looking at her with horror. She stammered, tried to deny, but the evidence was too clear. The manager of the restaurant stood confirming the footage was authentic. Several guests who had been present added their voices, recalling how strange her reaction had been. Angela sat pale, silent, unable to defend her. For the first time in my life, the balance of power shifted. My mother, who had controlled every narrative, every image, stood exposed. Her pearls gleamed under the lights, but her reputation shattered before everyone's eyes. She tried to storm out, but reporters who had come to cover the gala swarmed, their cameras flashing. The story spread quickly, carried by whispers, then by headlines. Catherine Wilson, once the paragon of small-town elegance, now the subject of scandal. For me, it was not only vindication, but liberation. I had taken the humiliation she gave me and turned it into her downfall. The days following the gala unfolded like a storm, sweeping through every corner of my mother's carefully constructed life. The footage of her hand dropping something into my glass spread quickly, first among the guests, then onto social media and local news. Headlines described the shocking collapse at a birthday party, the attempted poisoning revealed at a charity gala. Neighbors who once praised her elegance now whispered on sidewalks. Women she had invited to her garden club sent polite messages declining future meetings. The church, where she had been a prominent donor, requested she step back from leadership roles until the matter was resolved. For the first time, her name was not spoken with admiration, but with suspicion. She tried to fight back, calling journalists, insisting the video was manipulated, accusing me of orchestrating a smear campaign out of jealousy. But each denial sounded weaker than the last, drowned out by the clarity of the images. Her own friends began to avoid her, afraid of being associated with scandal. I watched this unfold with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because finally the truth was visible. Sadness because part of me still grieved the mother I had wanted but never had. Yet I did not allow grief to cloud my resolve. I moved forward, meeting with the police who had opened an investigation. I provided the video, the medical records, and the witness statements I had gathered. They listened carefully, their faces grave. Attempted poisoning was not a charge taken lightly. An officer assured me they would pursue it thoroughly. My mother, once untouchable, now faced the possibility of criminal charges. Angela visited me again this time, not with anger, but desperation. She begged me to reconsider, to retract my statements for the sake of the family name. She warned that if our mother were arrested, it would destroy everything. I listened quietly, then asked her where she had been when I collapsed, when I lay poisoned on the floor. Her silence was answer enough. I told her I was done protecting people who had never protected me. Angela left with tears in her eyes, but I felt no guilt. For the first time, I was free from the burden of their approval. At work, my colleagues rallied around me. Some had seen the news, others had only heard whispers, but all offered support. My boss told me to take as much time as I needed. Instead of retreating, I chose to keep working, channeling my pain into creativity. Campaigns flowed from me with new energy, bold and unapologetic. Clients praised the fresh vision. I realized I was no longer designing to impress my mother. I was designing to express myself. Meanwhile, my mother's world shrank further. Invitations stopped. Her phone calls went unanswered. Stores she frequented treated her with cold politeness. She grew desperate, calling me at all hours, leaving voicemails that swung between fury and pleading. In one, she threatened to disinherit me, as if money had ever been my goal. In another, she sobbed, claiming she had only wanted to teach me strength. I saved each message, a record of her unraveling. The investigation intensified. Police questioned the restaurant staff, confirming the unusual circumstances. They interviewed guests who recalled her dismissive words as, "I collapsed." My lawyer advised patience, reminding me that justice moved slowly. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already clear. Catherine Wilson was no longer a queen, but an outcast. The moment of true revenge came 3 months later when the town held its annual Heritage Festival. It was an event my mother had always dominated, striding in with Angela, greeting officials, posing for photographs. That year, she still tried to attend, wearing a bright dress, determined to reclaim some dignity. I was also there, not in the shadows, but as a featured speaker for the marketing agency's community projects. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause was warm, genuine. I saw her in the crowd, her face pale, her smile strained. For once, the attention was not hers. I spoke about resilience, about finding strength in adversity, carefully avoiding names, but everyone understood. The crowd's cheers washed over me like sunlight after years of rain. When the ceremony ended, people surrounded me with congratulations while my mother slipped away unnoticed. That was the essence of public revenge. I had not struck her with violence. I had not shouted obscenities. I had simply lived my truth out loud, and the world had judged her for what she had done. Still, the legal process moved forward. Eventually, she was charged with attempted poisoning, a case that would take months to resolve in court. She hired expensive lawyers, but the evidence was strong. Facing the possibility of prison, she grew reclusive, rarely leaving her home. Angela stopped visiting, embarrassed by the scandal. Friends evaporated. She was alone, the isolation she had wished upon me, now her own reality. I visited once, not out of obligation, but closure. Her house was dim curtains, drawn dishes stacked in the sink. She sat in her chair, smaller than I remembered, her eyes hollow. When she saw me, she whispered, "Why are you doing this to me?" I answered calmly, "You did this to yourself." I left her sitting there, the silence of the house swallowing her words. I walked away, feeling lighter than I ever had. My revenge was not simply her downfall, but my survival. I had broken free from her control and built a life she could no longer touch. The community saw me not as the weak daughter, but as the woman who had stood up against cruelty. That transformation was the truest form of justice. The months after the festival marked the beginning of my true healing. For years, I had defined myself through the prism of my mother's contempt, always measuring my worth against her impossible standards, always shrinking in fear of her judgment. But once her power collapsed, once the truth was no longer hidden in shadows, but laid bare for the entire community to see, I realized I was finally free to construct my identity without her. At first, freedom felt foreign, like stepping out of a dark cellar into sudden sunlight. My body flinched, my mind doubted. I would wake at night expecting her voice to echo down the hall, rehearsing insults waiting to ambush me at breakfast. Instead, the only sounds were the crickets outside my bungalow and the hum of the fridge. The quiet became proof that I was safe. Therapy helped me name what I had endured. Words like gaslighting emotional abuse, coercive control appeared in conversations with my therapist, and each word was like a mirror reflecting my past in sharper focus. For so long, I had thought I was weak or oversensitive. Now I understood I had been systematically diminished, my spirit starved of love and recognition. With each session, I shed shame and gained clarity. I also leaned on friendships that had been stifled by my mother's disapproval. Colleagues invited me out for dinners and concerts, and I went without fear of her accusations. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles, gestures of kindness that reminded me not all families operated on cruelty. Slowly, my circle expanded, and with it, my sense of belonging. Work flourished. Campaigns I led won awards. Clients sought me personally, praising my creativity and resilience. My boss offered me a promotion to creative director, something I once would have doubted I deserved. I accepted with pride, no longer questioning my capabilities. For the first time, I walked into meetings without shrinking, without rehearsing how to sound acceptable. My voice was enough. The legal process against my mother moved forward quietly in the background. There were hearings, motions, delays. Her lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was unshakable. Eventually, she entered a plea agreement to avoid a trial, acknowledging responsibility in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received probation and community service along with mandatory counseling. Some said it was too light for the crime, but for me, the sentence mattered less than the acknowledgement. The court record bore the truth: she had tried to poison me. No more denial, no more rewriting history. That validation was priceless. I chose not to attend her sentencing. Instead, I spent that day hiking a trail outside town, breathing in pine air, letting my legs carry me upward. At the summit, I looked across the valley and felt my chest expand with something I had never known before: peace. I realized revenge had never been the end goal. The true victory was freedom. By confronting her publicly, by surviving and reclaiming my narrative, I had broken the chain of abuse. She could no longer control me. The rest of her life would be lived in the ruins of her own making. I could finally live mine. Angela and I grew distant. She could not forgive me for exposing our mother, even though deep down she knew the truth. At first, I mourned the loss of sisterhood, but eventually I accepted it. Relationships built on denial cannot sustain love. I stopped waiting for Angela's approval the way I had stopped waiting for my mother's. Instead, I poured energy into the family I chose: friends, mentors, colleagues who celebrated me without condition. Over time, the ache of rejection dulled, replaced by gratitude for authentic connection. Healing also meant forgiving myself. I forgave the younger me who tried so desperately to please, who stayed silent to keep the peace, who believed the lies that I was unworthy. That younger me had survived long enough to reach safety, and for that I honored her. Journaling became a ritual, each page releasing memories that no longer needed to haunt me. I also began volunteering with a local shelter for survivors of domestic abuse. Sharing my story with women who felt trapped gave them courage, and their resilience inspired me. Together, we built a network of strength, proof that cycles of control can be broken. The more I spoke, the more I realized how many others carried similar wounds. My pain was no longer private shame, but public testimony, a beacon for others to find their way. Healing was not linear. There were days I still woke from nightmares. Days I still questioned whether I had been too harsh. Days I felt the ghost of her voice scolding me. But now I had tools support perspective. Those voices grew weaker over time, drowned out by the louder truth that I was whole, capable, and free. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about legacy. My mother's legacy was shattered by her cruelty. Mine could be built from resilience and truth. I realized that while her actions had shaped me, they did not define me. What defined me was my decision to rise, to resist, to reclaim my life. That realization was the final piece of healing. The chains had fallen, the horizon was open, and for the first time I was not looking back. If you are listening to my story right now and something inside you aches with recognition, if the words leech or worthless or ungrateful echo with familiarity, then I am speaking to you directly. I know what it feels like to live under the shadow of someone who is supposed to love you, but instead thrives on controlling you, on diminishing you until you doubt your own worth. I know how heavy the silence becomes when you swallow pain just to keep the peace. How lonely it feels to believe no one will ever see the truth. I want you to know that you are not alone. Toxic families exist behind polished doors and smiling photographs. Abuse is not always bruises or broken bones. Sometimes it is words whispered at the dinner table, expectations that suffocate love withheld like air. It can take years to even recognize that what you are experiencing is abuse because those who control you teach you to doubt yourself. But the moment you begin to question, the moment you whisper to yourself that maybe it is not your fault, that moment is the seed of freedom. Do not ignore it, nurture it. My journey was long and filled with fear. Standing against my mother felt impossible, like standing against the entire community that adored her. But what I learned is this: appearances are fragile, and truth has power when you dare to shine light on it. You do not need to shout. You do not need to fight with fists. You only need to gather your courage, your evidence, your allies, and choose to no longer stay silent. When I revealed the truth at the gala, I was terrified. My hands shook. My voice threatened to crack. But I stood there anyway because I realized silence had nearly killed me. Speaking out saved me. It can save you too. Maybe your abuser is a parent, a partner, a sibling, a boss. Maybe they hold the purse strings or the family reputation or the church approval. It does not matter how powerful they seem. Power built on lies crumbles when confronted with truth. What matters is that you protect yourself first. Build a plan, seek allies, document what you endure, and when you are ready, speak. Do not measure success by whether they change. They may never change. Measure success by your freedom, your safety, your ability to breathe without fear. That is victory. I also want to say, this revenge is not always fire and fury. For me, it was not about making my mother suffer, though she did. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring she could never hurt me again. Public exposure was my form of justice because she valued reputation above all. For you, justice may look different. It may be leaving quietly, cutting contact, starting fresh in a new city. It may be filing a police report. It may be confiding in a trusted friend or therapist. Do not compare your path to mine. Choose the one that keeps you safe and free. Healing is possible. I stand as proof. Today, I live without the weight of her voice pressing on my chest. I laugh with friends I work with pride. I rest without fear. I am not healed because she paid a price. I am healed because I chose myself. And you can choose yourself too. I want you to imagine a day when your story is no longer about survival, but about joy. Picture yourself waking up in a space that belongs only to you, surrounded by people who see your worth, who cheer when you succeed. That day can come. It may take time. It may take tears, but it will come if you keep walking. Do not give up before you reach it. If you are older and wonder if it is too late, hear me, it is never too late. I was 30 when my freedom began. Others are 50, 60, 70 when they finally step into the light. Life does not end when you escape abuse. Life begins. And the years you have left are yours to fill with peace, not fear. To everyone watching, thank you for listening. Thank you for letting my story be more than pain, for letting it be a testimony. If you take one thing with you today, let it be this: you are not defined by the cruelty of others. You are defined by the courage you find to rise. Choose to rise. Choose yourself.